It's an unwritten but very well established rule in professional sports today that athletes aren't allowed to hold their own opinions. Unless, however, those opinions include advocating for far-left political causes in organizations like Black Lives Matter or advocating for radical gender ideology. After all, the teams these athletes are employed to have no problem forcing their politics on every single fan. Not taking the knee and choosing to not wear a rainbow jersey, that's the kind of stuff that really gets you in trouble these days with the far-left media mob. But there's actually something even worse in the eyes of the Canadian legacy media, it appears. Now that would be publicly displaying your Christian faith and sharing videos of someone quoting the Bible. Now, Blue Jays pitcher Anthony Bass has had to learn that lesson the hard way. He has become the victim of what can only be described as a swarm attack by the progressive media in Canada. You see, Bass dared to share a video on Instagram of a Christian influencer quoting scripture as a reason for Christians to boycott brands like Bud Light and Target. Apparently, Bass is guilty of sharing, quote, anti-LGBTQ propaganda, and now fans are calling for the Blue Jays to release Bass, to cut him from the team. But we all know the truth behind this, right? The reality is the left is in full-on panic mode because the boycotts of brands like Bud Light and Target are proving to be way more successful than they first thought. And the left is now attacking anyone with a public profile who is advocating for these boycotts. Drop a like in the video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this: is it time for Canadians to also engage in these brand boycotts? Let me know in the comments, and let's get into it. Well, it's almost June, and you know what that means. The Rainbow Mafia are out in full force, demanding that every single Canadian bows down to their political ideology. Dissent on any level will not be tolerated. Now, reading the legacy media headlines about Anthony Bass's social media post, not even that, an Instagram story, which goes away after 24 hours, you might think that he's calling for something really evil, really scary. But before we get into that, let's first look at this so-called crime that Anthony Bass committed, this so-called anti-LGBTQ propaganda that Anthony Bass shared on Instagram, to see if really anything here is worthy of any attention at all.
Here's the reason biblically why I believe Christians ought to be boycotting Target and Bud Light and any other corporation that's pushing the things they're pushing. I think a lot of people make this into a political issue, or they say, oh, what's the big deal? If, is it really going to make that big of a difference if I'm shopping there or not shopping there? Here's what the Bible says. It tells us what to do as Christians in Ephesians chapter 5. It says this: take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them, for it is shameful to even talk of the things that they do in secret. So what does that mean to take no part? Well, what's Target do? It's a business. They make money. They sell things. And to take part in that is to take part in that God of mammon that they're serving, and to take part in the darkness that they're purveying and getting out to the world and shoving into children's faces. And to take part in that is to give them your money. And I believe the Bible gives us radical precedent to say, no, we are running from that. And to instead expose those things. To shout it to all the people that have ears to hear that this is evil, this is demonic. We won't stand for it. We're not going to go to the stores anymore, and we're not going to give them our money. We're going to let our voice be heard so that people can see the light and so that people can be pulled out of the darkness.
Wait, that's it? That's all that this guy said? So he's reading the Bible, telling Christians not to participate in giving your money to a certain brand. And that is apparently so dangerous that the entire Canadian legacy media must come down full force on this pitcher for daring to share that video. I mean, just take a look at these headlines. This is from BlogTO. Controversial Toronto Blue Jays player is promoting anti-LGBTQ propaganda. BlogTO themselves followed that up later with another article saying calls grow for Toronto Blue Jays to ditch Anthony Bass for promoting LGBTQ hate. That was apparently LGBTQ hate, although I'm pretty sure if you rewatch that video that we just watched, he makes no mention of LGBTQ people at all. He's talking about Target. He's talking about the brands engaging in what Christians obviously view as anti-Christian behavior. But athletes aren't allowed to do that in Canada anymore. They're not allowed to use their faith as a reason to not participate in what they view as anti-Christian activities from these sporting teams. But I wanted to share this article from Sportsnet, owned by Rogers, the same company that owns the Toronto Blue Jays. Blue Jays pitcher Bass's social media account shares anti-2S LGBTQ+ boycott video. And to go even further, Rogers put some sort of trigger warning on an article about their own employee. Support for 2S LGBTQ plus community, it reads. You deserve a world filled with love instead of bias, and when it's hard, you're not alone. Resources, education, and support for gender and sexual identity challenges can be found through PFLAG Canada. If you or someone you know is in need of immediate help and you don't feel comfortable contracting emergency services, crisis hotline numbers can be found here. So Rogers has written a hate article about their own employee sharing a video on social media and then slapped a trigger warning for the 2S LGBTQ plus community underneath that article. Now, these headlines from the Canadian legacy media are in every single outlet. City News, CBC, everybody is talking about this. Everybody is piling on to Anthony Bass for daring to share that obviously non-controversial video. Now, despite BlogTO saying that there are calls growing for Anthony Bass to be dropped by the Toronto Blue Jays, the BlogTO article only sources about 4 tweets from people calling for Anthony Bass to be released. And in their entire article, they could only find 1 tweet that got over 30 likes. Wow, those are some serious calls there. Consumers across the United States have been engaged in 2 very successful and impactful brand boycotts over the past few months. The first being a boycott on Bud Light, which was started after the company engaged transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney to promote Bud Light as a beer that stands with the 2S LGBT whatever community.
2S LGBTQI+.
The Anheuser-Busch stock price took a nosedive and has not recovered since. And if you go to any retailer, well, even here in Canada, Bud Light just isn't being purchased anywhere. The second brand boycott is, of course, Target, the major American retailer, who over the past 10 days have taken a market value hit of over $10 billion. Take a look at this article from the New York Post. Target, which has been caught in the middle of America's culture wars over gender, moved its Pride section in some southern stores away from the front last week after it said displays were knocked over by protesters who also confronted workers. The retailer also said it would remove items from the collection but did not specify which ones. Among the ones that garnered the most attention were, quote, tuck-friendly women's swimsuits that allow trans women, men, who have not had gender-affirming operations to conceal their genitalia, as well as rainbow-themed children's clothing. So Target's Pride collection includes children's clothing with Pride sloganeering, as well as women's clothing that are, quote, tuck-friendly. But apparently, if you're a Toronto Blue Jays player, you're not allowed to support the brand boycotts over these disgusting displays from these companies. Just look at some of the clothing that Target is selling to kids. It's absurd. So let me try and get this straight. Blue Jays players, according to the company that owns the Blue Jays, aren't allowed to voice their own political opinions on this issue. Meanwhile, the Blue Jays themselves will be hosting what they call Pride Weekend next week. During this Pride Weekend at the Rogers Centre, there will be rainbow bunting across the entire stadium. There's going to be a rainbow flag with the slogan, "Love is Love" at home plate. There are going to be drag queen displays all over the stadium. And every single fan who goes to the game will be given a Blue Jays jersey with a Pride Progress flag attached to the back, a cape on the back of the jersey. The fans will literally be wearing the Pride flag on their back, but conservative Christian athletes aren't allowed to say anything about it. Now, this all follows a very bizarre and disturbing trend in sports. It's not just baseball, it's also with hockey too. A few months ago, you might recall the controversy where several NHL players told their NHL teams that they would not be comfortable wearing the Pride warm-up jerseys before the games. Remember when Canadian television personality Sid Seixeiro had a meltdown on live TV over Ivan Provorov not wanting to wear the rainbow? Oh, by the way, this guy also happens to be an employee of Rogers.
Nothing scares me more than any human being who says, I'm not doing this because of my religious beliefs. Because when you looked in people's lives, you normally say that publicly, you'd throw up at what you saw. You would throw up at what you saw. And I have seen that a million times in a lot of different ways. So don't give me that. With respect. Don't give me that, because no one's perfect. All right? Don't feed me the religious beliefs line. And all of a sudden the NHL is going to back off this. The National Hockey League today needs to fine that organization $1 million and reevaluate how they support gay rights. Because that is insulting. That is the #1 trending topic in Canada. That is insulting what happened in Philadelphia. And if the NHL is serious about this, they say they are, we'll see. We'll see how serious they are today. But that whole thing was mishandled, and part of me couldn't believe it. Part of me could, considering how the NHL sometimes handles things.
Ivan Provorov, the Philadelphia Flyers player that first started this movement to stop wearing the Pride jersey, his jerseys were flying off the shelves. And eventually the NHL had to stop the initiative altogether because players were finally fed up with it. What this tells me is that athletes on the whole don't believe the nonsense that the teams they play for are pushing on the fans. Now my prediction is that Anthony Bass Blue Jays jerseys will be flying off the shelves as well. If not for anything else, just to send a message to Rogers, to the Canadian legacy media, that they are not on the side of the population here. Now, my message to Anthony Bass is to ignore the Canadian legacy media, ignore the Toronto media elite. The reality is, the majority of Canadians stand with Anthony Bass. The majority of Canadians don't believe in forcing transgender ideology onto every single person wherever they go. And actually, it's quite refreshing to see athletes speak up for once and display their faith without fear. All right, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.